Hi, it's Roger here with a little video on how to grow your business, how to take it global, and a story on the fish that roared. And I'm here in Singapore at the moment after having spent 2 months in America, in Europe, meeting many entrepreneurs who had that same question. How do I grow my business to the next level? I've got it started, and I've got a separate video on how to start a business. But on this one, it's all about that question. How do I grow it? And more importantly, how do I grow it so that I can compete with people at a global level? So I'm here in Singapore at the moment, and what I'm going to do is just share with you the background to why I'm going to talk about the fish that roared. Well, you might have heard of the book, The Mouse That Roared, and that was written by a guy called Leonard Whibley way back in like 1955, so it's quite a while ago. But it was during the Cold War, and it was kind of like this kind of comedic look at what would happen if you had a tiny little fictional country, which was called the Duchy of Fenwick, and what would happen if they declared war on America and on the world, which is what basically they did in the book, because they were figuring, well, you know what, we're going to go bankrupt. They only had wine, and someone else had come out with wine that was even better than theirs, so they're like, we're going to go bankrupt. If we go and declare war, then the Americans would have to come in and destroy us, and then they'll come and rebuild, and therefore would have a really nice country again. So that was the idea, but unfortunately it didn't quite work out that way, and they kind of accidentally won the war, and it was all about how a little country can end up dominating the whole world, even by accident, by just taking a number of certain steps. Well, I'm here in Singapore at the moment, and we have an office here in Singapore. We have a whole bunch of different people we work with here in Singapore who are entrepreneurs. One of them, who's actually on this island, Alex Blythe, his company Megazip, I was with their whole team yesterday because they're looking to go internationally, and we talked about these same 3 things I'm going to share with you right now as well. And it all comes to the same story, which frankly is what Singapore used to become global international themselves. And I think of Singapore like the Duchy of Fenwick. They have like no natural resources. Look here, I'm just looking out over the port. You can see right over there. And that's also part of the casino there as well, which, did you know that now Singapore is as big as Las Vegas in terms of casino revenues, and as a port it is now the #1 container port in the world. Well, how did it do that from like being a tiny little island with no resources whatsoever? And it did it by not declaring war on the world like the Duchy of Fenwick. It did it by declaring wealth on the world. It did it by declaring wealth in the world, by saying, okay, we're going to #1, we're going to go choose a playground which is global. So that's my first thing for you, is what is your playground? Is it your particular industry that you've kind of like defined in your city, in your country? Well, what would happen if you had just turned it and made it global? Singapore, that's exactly what happened. They were way back in 1965, which is when Singapore got its independence. Lee Kuan Yew took power. And at that point, he's like, okay, well, first of all, we're clearly not going to just make money by just doing business with ourselves. So, okay, we'll set up ASEAN, which is what they did. That's the Association for Southeast Asian Nations. And that helped a little bit. It's kind of like, we'll just trade between ourselves with like Indonesia and the other countries around here. But then he said, no, we actually got to go global, because that's where the real opportunity is. And so he looked out and said, well, how can we connect with everyone else in the world using the one resource we do have? We're an island. The one resource we do have is water. It's all around us. And so he said, right, let's actually make ourselves a world-leading port. Now, if you choose that, if you say, well, what's the size of my market, and you make it global, it changes everything. It's like that saying goes, if you want to catch whales, don't fish in a pond. It's like, okay, so start with the end in mind. It's like, I want to be having something that's global, so how would I add value to people who might be on the other side of the world? We did this with our wealth dynamics test. We did it with talent dynamics, where it's now available in all different countries. So we went global very quickly, and that allowed us then to learn from other countries in ways that we simply couldn't if we were just focused at our local market. So that then led us to the second thing, and it's the second thing that Singapore also focused at, and that you also need to focus at, which is, now that you've actually chosen your market, how do you make flow not come to you, but flow through you? One of the most interesting things that happened with Singapore is that they said, okay, let's actually take different markets and say how by that flowing through us, it would make that big difference. So for example, if you're in Australia and you want to actually take some goods and move them to Japan, well, you can either wait for every shipment that goes to Japan with the certain volumes that are there, or this is Singapore, where you actually have pretty much escalators everywhere, including outside here at the moment. So just going down the escalators down the hill to get to my little story down here. So this second element, which is all about, okay, well, how do I make sure that I'm having flow through me? If Australia has got containers it needs to get to Japan, Singapore is hardly on the way. But what your goal is to make like the fastest way to get from A to B through you, like it's through where you are. Like how does it connect up to you? Singapore said, how do we make it more valuable, faster, more efficient, more effective, cheaper for people to actually come via Singapore if they are wanting to get stuff from Australia to Japan? And the way they did it was to say, we're going to be the fastest turnaround. We're going to have more options of ships you can come on to go to Singapore, and then more options on ships you can get onto to then take your containers onto Japan. So as a result, you're going to do better by coming through us than by trying to wait for the next shipment to kind of head, which might be like, you know, once a day, as opposed to like 5 times a day if you just go directly to Japan. They did this with every different route to the extent that they then had 600 ports around the world, and those 600 ports that they connected with were in 123 countries, and they became the #1 container port in the world, starting with nothing except for the water around them. So what could you do with what's around you? You know, what could you say by me connecting my market in a certain way is going to be of more value? It's going to make it faster, cheaper, more effective for them to connect with each other through me, through the things that I put together, than simply doing it on their own. You know, we do that. You know, we just came back from our tours where I was talking to people in London. Many of the people in London were saying, hey, it's so great to come to this event once a year, my Fast Forward Your Business tour. And we'll put a link down to all the slides so you can go have a look at those as well. But yeah, they were saying that. They were saying, like, you know, we didn't meet each other over the year, but this is the perfect time when we can come and meet up with everybody that's actually really focused at how they're growing their business globally at the moment. And I'm doing the same thing going back to Bali now, where we have our Crystal Circle conference, who are all my top-end clients, all the people I mentor, who are all flying in from different parts of the world for exactly the same reason, because it makes more sense to do that once a year and connect with everyone than for them to be kind of like going one by one to meet each person. So what could you do? How could you go about creating that meeting point? How could you go about creating that kind of like connection point or market that allows everyone to come together? And by the way, let me say to you, I want to do the same thing with this YouTube channel. Now that I'm kind of into my 3rd month with the channel and we're kind of like starting to get a bit of a rhythm going, I'd love it that if you had whatever question you'd like to have answered, whatever question or thing or theme you'd love to have in this YouTube video, put it in the comments, right? Kind of like, okay, what would you like to see as something that you want me to cover? What would be just a very simple question you want me to ask about your own business? Whatever it is you have, let's make this interactive and let's make sure that I become, or at least this video becomes, a way that you can connect with the people you need to, and also to the information or the knowledge that I could share, which could be helpful to you, right? So go ahead, put a comment in. And that kind of brings me to the 3rd thing. And the 3rd thing is what happens when you have the flow coming through you. Do you go for economies of scale or economies of speed? The answer is you go for economies of speed, just in exactly the same way that Singapore did that by looking at all those different points and saying, how can we be most effective? In your case, it's the same thing, but across everything you do. Like when someone contacts you, how could you actually make sure that you're getting back or passing them, connecting to the right person, or getting the information they need in the fastest way possible? Maybe even it doesn't have to come through you. Maybe for your customers, it's how you set up your FAQs. It's how you give them a helpline or a way for them to get things as quickly as they need to. We're doing this, whether it's with these videos, whether it's Genius U, we're doing this to say, let's actually make those connections as much as we can so that they just happen in real time wherever you are in the world. Oh, and by the way, Singapore did this, not just with the ports, which allowed them to become #1, they did it with the financial system, which is why they're now #4 financial system or financial center in the world. They did it with casinos, I mentioned, the tourism industry. They've done it with the petrochemical industry or logistics, where they've become top world leaders out of over 100 plus countries, I think it's like 200 countries around the world, that they have actually become the #1, or at least between the #1 and #10. So what is it that you're doing which allows you to be global, not because you're there trying to kind of compete as a big company or a big country, but because you're actually there focused at how you're connecting the dots between everyone else. Now, by the way, all of this and this whole idea of being not the little mouse that roared, but the little fish that roared, is because if we were to go back, this is a symbol of Singapore. It's actually right over here, as you can see, like kind of just showing up there. It's kind of on my head. Here, why don't I come back this way? I'll kind of show you. This is something called the merlion, which is half fish and half lion. There's this great Chinese saying, Zen saying, which is, be still like a mountain, which is kind of like the lion, and flow like a mighty river, which is like the fish. It's like, how do you actually stand still and flow at the same time, and having flow come through you? That's really what Singapore is all about. And the story of the merlion, here's a little merlion here. Here we go. It's kind of a big thing on top of the hill there, and it's seen as the guardian of prosperity. But one thing that's really interesting about the merlion is that it didn't come from Singapore. In fact, if we go back to 1600, before Singapore was even a country, in 1600 there was a group of merchants who were in England who were saying to the government, hey, we got to get out there to all of the spice trades, we got to get out there to Asia, which is opening up now. But it cost a lot of money to go build the ships and to get that fleet out. And the British monarchy weren't interested or weren't able to fund all of that. So as a result of that, they said, no, we're not going to do that, but you guys can figure it out for yourselves. And actually the very, very first public listed company was created. And that was the British East India Company. A whole bunch of merchants got together and said, right, we'll all put money into it's like crowd-funded commerce. They all put money in, they all set up this business. It had enough money then to have the crew, to have the first ships, to then sail out. And they first went to India, and then they came over to Indonesia, they came to Singapore. Sir Stamford Raffles, who was the founder of Singapore, he was working for the East India Company. And when he got here, he kind of like, kind of claimed the place in the name of England, and called it Singapore, because Singapore in Sanskrit means Lion City. And so this became the Lion City. Before Lion City, it was called Temasek, which was Sea Town, right? So you got the sea and you got the lion. And what was interesting was that the actual symbol, the crest of the East India Company from day one, was a crest with two merlions, two lions with fishtails, to show the kind of like the monarchy, England, but England now sailing over the seas. And that kind of like concept of the two linked together then kind of like continued through and became like a fable here in Singapore. So at the point when Singapore became its own country and was looking for some kind of symbol, it chose the merlion as a symbol. And the reason I finish on that and I share that with you is, at the end of the day, like I said, it isn't about you trying to compete on your own. It's about how do you collaborate. It's how do you declare wealth on the world. It's how do you actually say, okay, well, what is it I can do straight away right now to just choose a global playground that I'm going to play in? How can I make sure that right now, by doing that, I can then focus at the flow coming through me, where all of them, like kicking a ball in a football game, would rather kick it to me to kick it to someone else to pass the goal than be trying to get it there themselves. So you become the center of flow, just like Singapore did. And then the third element from there is that once you've done that, how do you make sure that you focus at the economies of speed, not the economies of scale, so people keep coming through you because you become the path of least resistance. That's our little video this week, which is all about how do you grow globally. It's how Singapore did it, how it became a global leader. It's how we're doing that within our entrepreneur education by the different little things that we're up to within Entrepreneurs Institute. And it's what I would love for you, if that's your choice, to be able to get out there and make a global impact. So I hope this has been helpful. Do post any questions, any thoughts you have into the comments so that I can bring those into the upcoming videos. I'm now going to be heading from here and heading back to Bali, where I'm really looking forward to connecting with those of you who are going to be coming out and joining me there. Until next week, speak to you later.